Hi there, my name is Muhammad, and I'm the host of the Reconfigured podcast, a show that explores the intersection of technology, culture, and society. We bring professionals to talk about their extended experience or discuss about a specific topic that might interest the audience. All of our episodes are available for free with no cost to the general public. Just a quick reminder that we are always on the lookout for interesting guests who can share their unique perspective on the topics we cover, or you can pitch in a new topic to discuss on the pod. Just reach out to us on social media or apply to our available opportunities posted on Polywork. So, welcome to the show. Today I'm with Karl. Karl, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure, Mohammed. Thanks for having me. My name is Karl Hughes. I am the founder of a company called Draft.dev. Before that, I was a CTO and software engineer and technology person. Still do a lot of touching on technology, but I don't get to write as much code as I used to. So excited to be here.
Yeah, so you founded Draft.dev that helps companies create high quality technical content aimed towards developers. Would you like to talk more about Draft?
Yeah, sure. So basically, what the sort of backstory is, I've always liked writing, and so being a software engineer and engineering manager who also likes to write, I would put stuff out on my personal blog or Dev2 or Medium, and occasionally companies would reach out to me asking, "Hey, would I write for their blog as well?" And then companies would start to pay me for that occasionally. Um, During the pandemic, the company I had been working for started to run into trouble, and so they cut all the engineers down to half time. And I was looking for something to do with my free time, so I started writing more. And that kind of like snowballed really quickly. A lot of people started reaching out to me asking if I could write more content for them. These are like developer tools companies, hosting companies, CI/CD platforms that wanted high quality technical content from a software engineer that was also well written. Anyway, like 3 or 4 months in, I was like, okay, I've got to start hiring people and making this a real thing. And so by August of 2020, I had kind of started to hire subcontractors and make it a real business. And then by 2021, I was hiring full-time employees. And now 2 years later, we have probably about 13 full-time employees and then about 300 writers who are all software engineers around the world. We work with about 100 clients. And it's just, I mean, it's obviously like grown way faster and bigger than I initially anticipated. So it's been a fun journey. And so my role now is more just managing managers, which is a whole different thing. And I'm happy to talk about that too, but also happy to pause any of the little steps along the way on the journey there.
So let's say, for example, if I'm a company and I have, let's say, an X tool, so I would come to your company and tell you like, okay, X tool does 1, 2, 3. I want you to write me an article for this or
Yeah, it could be.
instructions.
Yeah, absolutely. It could be. Most of the time what we're writing is blog posts or some kind of like technical guide or like it's sort of supplement to the documentation. So for example, like a lot of companies we work with, they integrate with a lot of other tools, and it's a real pain to write these integration guides because you have to write just tons of them, like, kind of over and over. We've been working with Red Panda, for example, for the last year or so. And with Red Panda, they integrate with almost any data source and then lots of different code bases as well. And so there's all these guides you can kind of write around integrating Red Panda with your, I don't know, MySQL backend or your ClickHouse database or your Redshift, whatever. Anyway, it's just like the iterations go through. And so it takes a lot of work to write all this content. And so we basically find engineers who know those topics well to go out, write the tutorials, create like any code repositories and samples that need to go into there, and then send it back to the client. We also have, of course, like a whole editorial arm and tech review arm. So that's one use case for what we do. Another one could be companies pursuing more of like a top of funnel SEO driven content. So, a lot of people, like as a developer myself, like if I'm looking for how to get started with Kafka, let's say, I'm going to Google like getting started with Kafka, right? That's like the first step that every engineer does. And a lot of companies want to rank in the first few results for that kind of term, because that means they can sort of introduce themselves as well. So we may write like, big guides about how to get started with Kafka, some of the maybe specific errors you face, et cetera, that are designed to rank highly on search engines. So our clients can show up there and they can at least build trust with an audience. So it's all about high quality technical content, mostly used for these kind of marketing purposes, but it also sort of bleeds into support and developer relations. It's kind of a weird hybrid of things.
And now you manage people to manage people.
That's right. Yeah.
So, so do you want to talk more about this? So let me just put this idea in my mind. So you're now, let's say, you have draft, and now you have editorial people, and those editorial people have to take care from the writers. So the writer will write something, the editor has to check it, and then the editor will pass it to you to check if it sets the standard for draft or not. Is that
Yeah,
kind
I
of
don't.
correct?
Yeah, personally, I don't check any articles these days. We've got a full time engineering manager who oversees the technical side, and then he has several employees that work with him that oversee like individual tech reviews. And there's a whole process for escalation as well. That sometimes they'll get to him, but he's honestly more knowledgeable about engineering topics than I am for the most part. So he kind of is the final stop there. Similar on the editorial side, there's an editorial manager that would also kind of help out with several editors that also like go through and check each individual article, check it for plagiarism, check it for proper writing style, etc. And then the other teams are similar. Like our account managers have a lead who kind of keeps them up to date with what they need to know for clients. And so typically things get escalated to me when a manager runs into a situation that they've never run into before, or that might be a risk to the company for some reason. So for example, some complicated contract reviews still make it to me. And I either decide, does it need to go to our lawyer? Is this something I can kind of approve on my own? Stuff like that. That's a little more like potentially high stakes, because we do hundreds of articles a month. So, I couldn't possibly review them all at this point.
But if, let's say, for example, I want to apply to draft as a writer. So let's say, for example, I'm an ambitious person. I want to write. What are the requirements? Like, do I have to send a Dev2 account, a Medium, or a blog? Or I have to write, let's say, a proposal. This is what I write. Or do I have to have a huge technical background? Or let's say, if I have to set a specific thing, like, for example, the Kafka part. If I've been working at Kafka for, let's say, 2 to 3 years, does this qualify me to write, let's say, not articles, instructions for Kafka on your company? Or do you prefer someone who worked, let's say, Kafka and he worked Kinesis for AWS as an example?
Right.
So,
Yeah. I mean, obviously there's a lot of variability in like what our qualifications are for each article, but we do have an application form for engineers that want to write on the side. Almost all of our engineers that write for us have a full-time day job, or they're consultants or freelancers, and they do this on the side. So draft.dev/write, you can kind of go there and see the requirements, but we just ask for a few samples of things you've already written in the past, just to know that you've actually gone through the process of writing a piece, and you can kind of organize your thoughts pretty well, and that a lot of our writers are not native English speakers, and so it's fine if your writing needs to be cleaned up, as long as you technically know your stuff and you're good at presenting it. And then we look for specific skill sets. This all depends, because we're in this spot where clients come in with different requests, and we have to go find the writers that can meet those requests, right? So we have a large pool of writers to draw from, and often we'll reach out to specific ones who might be good at a certain topic. But we also send out an email every week that says, hey, writers, here's our open topics for this week. If you want to apply to any, feel free to click through, and you can apply on our platform. There's a little bit of a platform we have for that. So there's kind of two ways. We can either reach out to the writers in our pool, or the writers will kind of opt into a piece. And usually then we'll check their background and make sure it actually makes sense that they would have worked on this. Like, for example, if you've worked in DevOps for a number of years, maybe you've never actually used like a particular CI/CD tool, but you've used other ones like it, you can kind of learn that one and write an article on it. Like, you shouldn't have to have had, you don't always have to have extensive experience in the tool just to write a simple tutorial. But then there's other topics where, if it's like more of an expert level guide to the inner workings of something, where it does matter that you've had that internal experience. So again, our team is kind of like behind the scenes going through and trying to match up the best skills with the best articles for each particular case.
and as a writer, should I update you if I, let's say, started working on a certain technology by time? So let's
Yeah.
say, for example, I've entered and I've written about, let's say, Kafka for a while, and then later on I can write you about, let's say, code pipeline and code build, and I can give you the entire DevOps environment. But you didn't know that when I applied. Now I've started doing it. Is there a process that you do with the writers where you check up with them to know if they're up to date so you can actually feature them on different articles?
Yeah, exactly. We basically every quarter we kind of send out a reminder, and then writers will kind of update us with their newer skills or things they're working on, just like you said. Yep.
Mm. I'm going to shift to another question, which is you and your friend Manuel Weiss, did I catch the name right?
Weiss, yeah, yeah.
Weiss, created marketing content on This Is Good Marketing, which is available on thisisgoodmarketing.com, which got sold in 2022. From what I've seen from it, it's more of creating a content marketing engine, which is quite interesting. As someone I'm doing my own startup on the side, I would be interested. Why would I be interested in doing a content marketing engine in the first place? And why should I and other companies should focus on this?
Yeah. So content marketing is really interesting. I really got into this when I started Draft.dev because a lot of our clients are using the content we create as part of their marketing strategies. So content marketing is really useful when you want to build trust with an audience over a longer period of time. It almost never results in like instant sales. Like, in other words, you don't write one blog post and immediately get just tons and tons of sales. And it's just very rarely does that happen. But what it can do is, let's say you consistently write a blog post every week for a year, you will absolutely start to get really like a high volume of search traffic if you're doing you're kind of researching the topics well and you're doing things that appeal to your audience. And if you have good calls to action, you'll likely be generating a steady flow of leads from that content over time. So what's cool about content when you build like a publishing engine, like what we call a content marketing engine, is you build the discipline to actually consistently stick with it, do it over time in the right way. You'll see a measurable result grow over time very consistently. And that's one of the things I like about it. Unlike a lot of marketing tactics can be very hit or miss. They can be very like, big swing, and then we don't know if it's going to pay off for 6 months. So ads, they're very expensive. You might run a lot of ads before you realize that, oh, this doesn't work for us. Content almost always works consistently, but you do have to invest in it steadily over time. So there's kind of a bit of a waiting period before you start to see results, and then you start to see them tick up. So like, a lot of examples from companies we've worked with. There's a company, early stage startup we started working with probably a year and a half ago. They were one of our earlier clients. They steadily have been publishing 10 to 20 articles a month on their blog, really high quality content, very technical, really related to their their product and target audience. And they're now getting like 200,000 page views a month from this content alone. And so you think about like, yes, it didn't pay off in a month. Like the first month, they probably had 0, but by month, whatever, we're at 18 or something, they're now getting, they're probably one of the leaders in their space for the amount of traffic they're getting on a monthly basis. So there's a lot of value to that, obviously, in the long term. But in the short term, it is one of those things you have to kind of like wait out the period of like building up the rankings in Google, building up the trust with readers.
So for an example, so what about like good marketing? So what I do is, for example, I would write a bunch of articles on an X amount of days, and I would see the traffic that's coming from them. From the content that's getting traffic, I would write more content related to this traffic so I can keep the flow going. And the content that doesn't bring much traffic, I would just kill it off.
Not necessarily. I mean, it depends. So a piece might only get a few visits a month, but if it's really valuable and helpful to people, there's no reason to kill it off. You may want to update it to make it more search engine friendly, or to make it more useful to more people, or find other channels for it. But there's no reason. Usually, like, unless a piece gets out of date that it's not really correct anymore, I wouldn't. We don't recommend like removing it entirely.
So what I do is I would create the engine from scratch as to check all of this, or do I have to use like an existing service, or what's the process of doing it?
Yeah, a lot of people that do content marketing do it start off in-house. In other words, they like have their team maybe take turns writing blog posts to make sure they get steady content flow, and then as they grow, they decide how much they want to do in-house versus outsourced to either freelancers or agencies. And there's pros and cons to both. I mean, we're at Draft.dev, we're an agency, but freelancers are typically going to be cheaper than an agency because you don't have all the overhead, but the trade-off is they're usually less reliable and they may or may not have the same level of quality control. So in other words, a freelancer may go get a full-time job because they decide freelancing is not for them, whereas the agency is hopefully going to be around, or at least if they've been around for a while, they're hopefully going to continue to be around. And the agency, again, may also have like editors in different places. They may be able to replace writers as they go in and out, so there's less of gaps in publishing when you have those things. And in-house, the challenge there can be just that your team is going to get busy with other things. So a lot of our clients will start off asking their engineers to write blog posts for their company, but then those engineers are busy building the product that they're really paid to do, and so they don't get a lot of time to go write a couple blog posts a month. It's a lot of work. And so typically for those kind of companies, working with an agency or freelancers makes more sense, or at least for a lot of their content, it does. So there's pros and cons to all. Again, agencies are going to be more expensive, but they're kind of more consistent and like hopefully higher quality.
So I'm going to move to a different question, which was, you were the CTO of the Grade network. As a CTO, there's a certain level of responsibility and tough decisions that you have to take towards making the company proceed forward. What is the role of a CTO in your perspective, and what are the challenges you have faced? Now, here's the thing. I've asked this question with different people who did become CTOs. Each person has their own point of view of it. There's no definitive answer of what a CTO is. Yours might be what experience you have dealt with in the past. Someone else might have a very smooth experience. Some people might have not a smooth experience.
Absolutely.
So you can have the full freedom to explain about this.
I was going to say the same thing. I was going to say that like the role of CTO is funny because at a really small company, it's very different from a really big company. And so let's just like put that out there, that no two CTOs are the same, and that the size of company or the type of company, the focus of the company, all that will make a big difference in what the role really is. I'll tell you about my experience with it. Honestly, like I started I was the first engineering hire at the Grade Network. I had been the head of engineering at another startup before that. So I'd already like led and grown an engineering team in the past. So I kind of knew how to do that. Had gone through the MVP building phase and then building out kind of iterations on that product. And then I got hired by the Grade Network as their first engineer to, eventually hire and lead on the engineering team. Now, the reality of that sort of whole journey was we were never huge. So like I think I at most had like 3 or 4 employees that were directly working with me. And so it wasn't like I was, managing managers and had this huge hierarchy under me like it would be at a large company. But the role, I mean, at an early stage company like that, the role is typically going to be like the initial, like building the initial product, the MVP or whatever iteration they're on at that point, and then hiring all the different key people to continue to grow that. So product managers, designers, software engineers, eventually like engineering managers, like you just basically like continuing to hire in the hierarchy under you. So the role shifts from a lot of building in the early days to like you may be even writing code, reviewing code, et cetera, to a lot of hiring and oversight and kind of maybe technical architecture review and things like that in the later, like, further as you get further along. And so the big thing for that role is you kind of need to be really dynamic, or at least be open to learning, this big shift that happens over time. And that's something I really like personally. One of the things that I know about myself is I tend to get bored really quickly. I'm not like a stay in one place kind of person. And so for me, it's very important that any role I have, whether it's starting my own company, being a CTO, that it's dynamic and changing every 6 to 12 months, so that I'm like constantly having to push myself and learn something new. And it does that for sure, especially if your company gets funding and starts growing. And so, it was definitely it's definitely a good experience, but it is also very dynamic. So for example, like one day I might be doing interviews to hire a new engineer, and then the next day I might be reviewing code and writing a new feature, and then the next day I might be on a call with a customer talking about how some bug might be affecting them or something like that. And the next day I might be helping our sales team pick a new CRM because they need to know what technically will integrate with whatever. So it's like literally everything in a small organization like that, which again, a lot of fun to me, but it can be a real challenge if you're used to a more well-defined role.
In other companies, they might offset some of those things to a tech lead, or let's say someone
Absolutely.
who's
Yeah.
a senior developer who had worked in this. So they say, "Hey,
Right.
you have this CRM problem. You've worked in it. I think you can take control of it. I trust you on this. Just go do it." But when the team gets a little bit smaller, there's a lot of responsibilities for the CTO because he can't throw tasks on the tech leads anymore. So
Yeah.
you're
There's
stuck.
like nobody to delegate to. So what are you going to do?
So you're stuck with what you got.
Yep, yep. Yeah, and this is something too though that really as a early employee at a startup, you make your role and you decide, what you're going to contribute most to the organization. And I always tried to look at it like my job as the first engineer was to pioneer a pathway for the rest of the engineers who would join us later. So in other words, like I would try to build out a really good, initial version of what we were building, kind of set some core architectural principles, build some early documentation, kind of set some standards, and then get out of the way and start to hire a team to just continue to like make everything better. And so with anything, you want to be like on that edge of leading charges, but you don't want to like let yourself just always have to do those things forever because eventually you're going to have to hand all that off.
But one of the things that I really get afraid, let's say, if someone who gets to work as a CTO is that especially if you're the one who's starting it and not taking over from someone, is that whatever decision you take, whether it's good or not, it's going to be carried on to the end.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
any screw ups you do in the beginning will not be inevitably removed at all. So
No.
the problem is that there's a good amount of companies or startups, they begin with a very bad MVP just to please investors.
Yeah.
The problem is that you carry a lot of technical debt and it gets burden you later on, to the point that even if you hired more people, they cannot handle the situation you could have done when you first begin. So
Yep.
there's a huge amount of pressure for the CTO to choose the right thing, and it puts you in a cornerstone where you have very minimal time to take the right
Yeah.
decision, but you have to take a decision that to move forward, but might not be the right decision.
Right.
And you enter in this dilemma of what I'm going to do, and you end up, let's say, days thinking about this architecture thing that comes into your mind. Let's say technology X can do good the first 5 months, but technology Y might cost us more at the beginning, but it is much more of a better option in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Those kind of decisions, how and what you do to at least take path that is realistic, because you're not going to take the right path from the beginning.
Right. It's even worse than what you said because the reality is not only do you not know what the best choice is, you don't know how the business will evolve. So every startup I've been with has made a pivot to some degree. For example, the Grade Network, initially our target audience was teachers. We thought teachers were going to be selling, like buying our product and using it in their classrooms. Reality, after like a year of building that, or maybe 6 to 12 months of building that, realized, oh wait, actually we need the principal to go like be the leader of this movement and get the thing in the school, and then we need a separate login for teachers and a separate one for students. So now we've already built this product aimed at two people, teachers and students, and now all of a sudden it's got to have a third person that we didn't design in the initial version of it. So of course we didn't get to go rewrite the whole application to optimize for that new third person. We had to just kind of hack it on there, and so now we've got this piece of shit we just hacked together, like, and that's how it continues to evolve. All software startups do this. There's no way around it. There's no way to fix it. Like you can't make perfect decisions as an early stage like engineer or CTO or whatever. So part of it is letting it go. I mean, like I wish, it's like I know that whoever takes over that software someday is going to look back and say Karl was such an idiot. Well, I just was working with incomplete information. I would argue that would be my argument, at least. That's how I would defend myself. Now, that said, I will say that like there are some ways to make your software, and good developers know this. There's ways to make your software more flexible and minimal, and those are the things that I would encourage you to do. So, for example, sometimes startups may overbuild complicated technical solutions because they're afraid of scaling problems that they haven't faced yet. Well, in most cases, you can sort of get around those. Let me back up. In most cases, the complexity added by tackling those scaling problems too early is not worth the potential risk they mitigate. So for example, this is kind of a naive example, but let's just like start here. Let's say that you've got this one form on your website that's going to get submitted a lot. And if your company grows really fast, it could get submitted hundreds of times a second, right? So you build a queuing system into it. But what if in reality your company never gets big enough to actually get that form submitted hundreds of times a second, and it's actually twice a minute? And so you just built in a whole queuing system, and you've set up and rely on this new piece of software running to keep things organized that is absolutely unnecessary. You could have you couldn't have just skipped the queue entirely. You could have built a simple queue just built into your existing database with a key value store or something. And instead you've set up RabbitMQ, and you've got some, cool caching going on behind the scenes, like all this stuff. So now all that complexity is built in forever. Like you say, like you're never going to be able to go tear that out. And so one thing I always encourage early stage CTOs, and tried to do myself, was just keep the simplest version for as long as is reasonable. And then once you get to a point where that's an actual problem you need to solve, make the business case to solve it. Now, there's some problems you do have to solve a little before you actually face them. So you should be able to see, like, oh, all of a sudden, like you as a CTO need to know what's on the horizon for the business. Let's say you just got a new round of funding, and they're going to inject $1 million into paid ads a month. And we've never done that before. We might be facing some of those scaling problems. So let's get ready. Let's tell the business, here's what we technically need to do to face those problems that we're likely going to have. And so it's always about blending your knowledge of where the business is at and what the business is doing with their money and their marketing efforts and their growth efforts, with where's the technology really at and where are bottlenecks going to happen? Do we have all the instrumentation in place to actually face the challenges we're going to face, and try not to overbuild too much?
Yeah, I even faced this problem of overbuilding, but there's one time that it saved me a huge amount of time. So I can give you a small story of this.
Of course.
So I was doing a front-end component on using React, and I've done an entire feature, and I encapsulated it using context. And what I did is that I've made it in a way that if you pass it just the data, it will work always as intended. So there's one day, one of my coworkers told me like, hey, I like this feature. I want to use it in an example for another thing. So I told her, yeah, just copy the code and put it and just pass the values. And she's like, wait a second, this will work? I told her, yeah, I've already written it in a way that it isolated it from any environment, that even if you turned it into a web component and you put it on a random website, it would work. And she told me like, okay, why did you do this? I was like, I expected something similar to that.
And that's that insight, though. That foresight you had is the thing you're always trying to have a little of without going too far, right? Like you obviously knew your environment well enough that you could build with that foresight, which is really smart. And also that's ideal. Like that's how a good experienced engineer should think. I think
that's not the funny thing, is that in the same project, I've created something that has a huge table, and you need to see values, and the person who's giving me tasks is adding more to the table, more features and all of that. And then all of a sudden be like, okay, how about if we can make this table show infinite tables? And it's like you choose the thing that you want to see,
Yeah.
and it would render different tables. Now, in a system, if you're writing front-end code and you have the same provider, if you're using, let's say, for example, Redux, you have to find a way to clear and then get. So what I did is like, okay, just choose what you want, just pass the data, and it will work exactly the same. All you need to do is just put a drop down and just pass it different data, and it will work exactly the same. And it's something that I've predicted it almost 6 months before than doing it.
Yep.
And it happened.
Yep.
It was insane. I didn't even expect.
But
it was a huge bet. It's a huge bet.
Right. It's a bet. Yeah. And so to me, you always want to make some of those bets when you think that's likely to happen, or you can try to ask the business, like, are you likely to need those, the infinite tables sorts of a case? Is that possible? And it's hard to know. It's impossible to know. And so, yeah, I mean, you could accidentally do some overbuilding. You could also accidentally or intentionally build in some things that make your system more robust. And hopefully it comes out as a net positive in the end.
No, it came up as a net positive. I'm not.
Yeah, that sounds like the ideal case.
I'm going to move to another question, which was you are the head of engineering at Payback. There are certain responsibilities that a head of engineering has to take into consideration, and it's something that you have more than one department to lead. Can you define the role of a head of engineering, and what does it have a significant difference than a tech lead?
Like, again, this is kind of like to the CTO question. It just depends on the size of the company and the where they're at and what they do. With Packback, they were pretty early stage as well. When I was also the first engineer there, and then kind of like eventually hired on a team. I think there were probably 7 or 8 people that worked for me at that point at that company at the most. A couple freelancers and a couple like a lot of full time people. And so it was very similar to the role of the CTO at the Great Network. I was involved in the business like meetings that were talking about the high level and future and company direction stuff, but then I was also kind of involved in hiring engineers and keeping them productive and going through all the back and forth with them when there were technical questions. I was not that technically experienced at that point, and I mean, to be fair, like I've never been that great of a software engineer, but I was knowledgeable enough about the business and good at leading people, and that was kind of like the blend of those three things was what was appealing for my bosses and why they put me in that role. And that's something that's interesting that I found a lot in my career has been that it's rarely one single skill that has gotten me ahead. It's been the mixture of skills in unique ways that tends to like earn me that next promotion, or like when I started my business, the mixture of skills in software engineering, writing, and management and leading people was why we took off so fast, essentially. So anyway, I think head of engineering is similarly small company. It's going to be a wide mixture, wide range of stuff, a lot like a CTO. At a big company, it'll get more well defined and it'll get a little more like managerial. And eventually, it might be even a middle management role if you have like a CTO above you or something like that.
Mostly, it's I think the head of engineering. If let's say in a big company, you would be just code reviewing and checking with people's tasks. You're basically going to work with the product managers or scrum masters or whatever the hell the company is working with.
Right.
But you would be managing the developers with the product manager and the product owner, as an example. And you would take instructions from the CTO if something happened. But
Yeah.
when the company scope is smaller, the role becomes much more wide. I'm going to say this. It becomes wilder, if I'm going to say.
Yes, absolutely. That's a good way to put it.
But why would here's the thing. Why would someone hire you as a head of engineering rather than just saying, okay, this guy is just leading everything and just put him as a CTO if he's the one who's going to do most of the work?
I think, and this is actually not I don't think this was a bad call. The founders, uh, knew that I was not the most experienced person in the world. And if they grew really fast, they wanted to leave room for a title above mine. And again, I don't think that was the wrong approach, because at that point when I joined, I was really just a few years out of school and like just kind of like still, I don't know, I was still not a great software engineer and not that experienced in managing people. So if it had gone really well, and this didn't end up being the path we went, but like if it had gone really well and we'd grown really fast and the team needed to grow even faster, I would have loved to have had a really experienced CTO come in above me to like learn from. So it's kind of like I know that a lot of people. I was talking about this with a friend the other day. A lot of people at startups like to say that like titles aren't important, or that it's like just whatever about titles. But I actually think they are important, and I think they are something that help people understand where they fit and set expectations appropriately. They're also helpful when people go on to get the next job, that they actually like earned the title they have. It's like you don't just put ideally you don't just put your junior engineer as a CTO just because they're your first engineer, because what if you have to move them later, and that's a really awkward conversation. So anyway, I do think titles matter, and I think that there's something that founders should, and these founders did think about as they were making those moves.
And I'm going to move to a different question, which is
Yeah.
you were hired as the first employee twice in an early startup, which we defined before, and you end up leading an engineering team and getting new hires. What is the feeling to be the first person to start something at a company? Although we've covered it when and the CTO part, but everything that you start with impacts the company's vision on the long run. And especially that you're working with startups and you're the first employee, so you're number one
Mm-hmm.
on the technical. What is the feeling of being, let's say, the first employee, or if you join the startup that says you're employee number 5 or you're employee number 6?
Yeah, it's really fun. I love it. I mean, I think this comes down to like this. Your results will vary. So in other words, like everybody is different in what they like in their career and what they look for in a job. For me personally, I love getting to know. I love seeing how my work as an engineer affects the whole business, not just one little tiny, like line item. So my back even before getting into startups, my internships were with huge companies in college. So I worked at GE and Siemens, where like I would work on some tiny little speck of documentation, and that would take months to finally get released, and that's my whole impact on the world for them, was that tiny little thing that barely mattered and 3 people read. And they that's how those companies operate. That's how they have to operate. They're huge. But startups are way more fun. I mean, like I'd get to release it, like I'd write a feature, release it the same day, and then see if it actually worked the next day. It's like that feedback cycle is super fast and really fun to get. On the other hand, they're also really challenging because you don't get to go work on features for a long time. You have to cut corners sometimes. I mean, like, um, at least some of the startups I've worked for, we barely did testing because it was like, it doesn't matter. There's only 3 people that are going to see this anyway. We'll just release it and fix it if we have any bugs. Like, and that's not a great way to run software teams, but like, there's also a pragmatism that you have to look at when a company has 5 people and you're just trying to figure out if this product is even necessary before you go invest more money into building something better. And so there's constantly these trade-offs you're doing. But to me, it was really fun. I always have loved working with small companies, and it was great training for starting my own company, which is something else I always tell engineers that are interested. If like you ever do want to start your own business, it's a really great experience to join as an early employee, because you'll get to see what it's like from day zero. Like I got to meet everybody on the sales team at Packback and the Grade Network, and I got to learn how they do their jobs. And then when I started Draft.dev, I had to do sales. So I got to learn, like, I kind of knew from them what I should be doing as a salesperson. And so it's really cool to get to see all the roles, kind of get to some exposure to like investors and to the whole business of raising money, how equity works in a startup, all good stuff if you ever want to start your own thing.
So the knowledge that you get from starting a startup is much more better than working in corporate, because you get to see the other parts that you don't end up seeing in
Yeah, if your goal is
corporate.
to start a company, right? Like, I mean, if your goal is to go work your way up through corporate middle management, or to become a director at a big corporation, then probably need to stay on that path, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But if your goal is to start your own business one day, which was kind of always in the back of my head, then you should absolutely be like learning from people who've started their own business. And at big companies, you get cordoned off into a little, a tiny little niche within this huge organization. You don't get to see how the whole organization functions. And it's very different from starting a business from scratch, where you have to do everything.
So this is why people from corporate companies, they fail in doing their own startup, because they don't know how to do it.
It can be hard. I mean, I think it can be really hard because there's a level of humility that you have to have once you're doing everything. I mean, like, founders joke about this, but they are the company janitor in the early days. When at Packback, when we got to around 20 employees, we had an office with 3 trash cans, and we had a checklist of who was last to leave the office had to go empty the trash cans. Like, there wasn't a janitorial staff at that stage. So I think that's really, you have to be very humble and ready for that kind of like doing everything. And then you have to learn functions that aren't your core thing. So if you've been at a large company, you've been a software engineer, maybe you've had a little exposure to design and maybe a little bit to product management, but if you're the founder of a company, you need to now go learn sales. You need to learn operations and finance, like a lot of functions. So you could try to partner up with other co-founders, which certainly helps like widen out your usefulness, but you also will just have to learn some things that you haven't done before. And it can be really tough for people who've kind of worked their way to a certain level to kind of step back and go back to the entry level role of being a brand new, I don't know, operations manager at a tiny startup.
But also, if you want to work with a co-founder, you also have a problem managing that other co-founder as well,
Oh, it's
because
so hard. Yeah.
they can take decisions that you might not be pleased of. So
Oh,
let's
it's
say,
like getting married. I mean, it really is. Like it's that level of commitment and that hard to get it right. You know,
so for
it's very
example,
tough.
I'll give an example. So let's say, for example, you're the technical person and you hired someone who's like a business kind of guy, and he goes and he pitched into to an investor, and he pitched in stuff that you've never worked in, and he
Exactly.
tells you, look, you'll figure it out. You'll figure it out. No problem. You'll figure it out.
Yeah, that I mean that happens all the time. They pitch it to a customer and the customer expects it, and you're like, well, we haven't built that feature yet, and we can't do it overnight. It's yes, difficult.
So I'm going to move to a different question, which is you wrote a book called Starting a Software Startup, which after a decade of your experience in the software and startup business, what made you resolve towards writing a book about this topic, even though a good portion of software developers are not always business oriented,
Mm.
and the founder can be can be a non-technical person? A good portion of the time. Some founders are technicals. Or is it aimed towards software developers who want to become startup owners but lack the business aspect to accelerate with? So the example is someone who worked in corporate for a very long time, doesn't have the
Hmm.
business idea. It would be much more easier to read a book from someone who did this kind of thing than to
Yeah.
actually dive into a startup because they might waste time.
Yeah, that was my motivation for putting that together, and it was really just a compilation of a bunch of things I had already written, which is one of the things when you write, like for me, I've been writing consistently on the internet in some form for at least the last 10 or 12 years, and I've written a lot about the different steps in my own journey and the things I've been learning along the way, and so I took a lot of those blog posts and re-edited them up and kind of put them together into this big book format, which was yeah, it's just an ebook on my website. But it absolutely, I just had a call with a founder, or, a would-be founder, or to-be founder this morning, where he was asking, like, he had read it and he was like, this was the most clear, thorough, just like simple explanation of what to do on day one, day two, day three, like just get through the process. Is that was my goal, is like, whether you have a software engineering background or a non-technical background, in either case, there's kind of a list of things you have to go through to get your business going, and looking at what that is and seeing it all laid out in one place is really helpful to some people. There's probably been other books that are just as good at laying this out, but I just figured it was nice to have my own from my own experience, and it's something I look back at too, and think about, like, would I do this differently, or is this still what I think is correct? Because my experience is constantly shifting, and I'm learning new things, and it's never finished, right? So yeah, that's been really it was a good experience. That was the second book I wrote. I wrote one before about a more technical topic, and like I've really enjoyed doing that. I hope someday to do it like a more traditional, like, published book as well, but at this stage that's just too much work, and I don't think the payoff is that high anymore in published books. So
There's also the pain of writing a book. It's much more harder than writing a blog
oh
post.
yeah. Yes. Yeah, like
And
writing a blog post every week for 52 weeks doesn't feel like that much to me, but writing a whole book in 1 year feels like a lot. It's probably the same amount of writing, but it's just like that the compilation part is hard too.
also the difficulty of either finding a publisher, or if you self-publish, you also have to market it yourself, and it becomes even pain in the ass to actually
Oh, it's
market.
so hard. Yeah, very hard these days. But anyway.
Based on your experience, there's a difference between being a founder and being a CEO. Sometimes individuals who want the founder title much more than being a CEO because they want to be the first claimers of the idea, yet they lack the management skills to handle and
Yeah.
execute events. Would you like to talk more about this in details?
Yeah, so I've noticed this thing where a lot of founders sort of tie their value to the company by the amount of time they work. So what I mean is, like, a lot of founders take pride in the fact that they work 80-hour weeks, and that they do everything, they sign every contract themselves, that they talk to every customer, that whatever. But like, that's not what CEOs do. When you look at like a CEO of a mid-sized business, like a successful mid-sized or large company, you don't hear them saying, like, taking pride in those sorts of things. That's what naive founders do when they're just starting out. They think, oh, I must work hard if I want to be successful, or I must work long hours if I want to be successful. But really successful CEOs look at it as, how do I leverage my time to inspire my team to do the most work as possible, and then get the most out of every hour that I spend. So I joined a group probably about a year ago called Entrepreneurs Organization. It's a global group of people who own small businesses, small to medium sized businesses, and I get to meet in that group people who are running 20 to $100 million businesses. And I'm, down here in the very tiny end of like, a couple $1 million business, but like I get to learn from them. And one of the things that I notice as I talk to these CEOs running much bigger companies than mine is it's not that they put in 80 hours a week. It's not a clear line between more hours equals bigger company or more output. It's that they've learned how to spend 5 hours, let's say, of time in meetings a day to get their team to then output even more and like focus on the right metrics. They've learned to be disciplined in how they use their time, what they say no to, what they delegate. And so again, like my point in that blog post that you're referencing here about founders versus CEOs is like, if you're a founder who thinks in terms of, I must work the most hours if I want to be successful, I would caution you or say like, well, what do real successful CEOs of mid-sized companies and large companies do? It's not working more hours necessarily. They may work a lot. They may like what they do. They may be obsessed with it, but they're also really good at delegating and leveraging their time. Elon Musk is like the classic example of like people always ask, how does he run all these companies? Well, the truth is he's basically just a figurehead, I'm sure, at most of them. He's got a whole operations and management team that runs them. He might be out there keeping up with their monthly numbers and he might be the PR face of them, but he doesn't go to meetings about production at Tesla every single day. Like there's just no way that's possible. So he's learned how to leverage his time in a way that a lot of entrepreneurs struggle to get to.
And then you open on the internet and they screwed the whole idea of being a founder, and you see someone on TikTok saying, this is my ideal day of a CEO, goes to the gym, eats healthy food, does yoga. I was like, dude, when you have time to do work? Like,
well, hey, look, I got to give like props. If somebody's figured out how to make good money without doing work, they've got something figured out that I haven't.
I want to do that as well. But it's like, if you see those videos, it's like,
yeah,
you've seen those videos. It's like someone who claims to be a founder. He wakes up at like 5 a.m., does meditation, brings a bowl of, let's say, chia seeds and cereal.
Sure.
And then goes to the gym, and then goes to this place, and then goes to that place. And the most of the time, just going to cafes, opening a MacBook Pro, just opening the mail app, and just scrolling through it, and that's it. It's like I wish it was that easy, but it wasn't. It's not.
It is so it changes over time. What's been interesting to me, because we've gone through this shift really quickly in the first 3 months when I was doing everything. I was on a sales call. Then when I closed the deal, I would get the contract signed. I would go start writing the work. I would do my own editing. I would find my own images. I'd send it back to the client. I'd deal with any revisions. I did literally everything myself the first few months. So when you're doing that, there's no time to be eating chia seeds and meditating every day. You're just grinding it out. But that said, like, now when I have a full-time staff of 13 to people, I've got a set of directors who run each of their teams, and like I'm managing managers. It's not that I don't work hard on the business, but like the work looks a lot different. It is literally just going to meetings all day and like opening the inbox and like checking a few email things. Like I will help out with a client thing if somebody needs me to, but it's not normally needed. So I let the team handle that. And I just try to keep an eye on metrics, keep an eye on all the relationships that we need to have. Like I'm going out and having, this kind of like recording a podcast, right? Like this doesn't look like work to people, but this is exactly what the work is as the company gets bigger, because you're supposed to be out there building up relationships and building out awareness and everything else. So anyway, I'll say that like, it does sometimes feel like I don't work. I feel that way. I'm still getting used to this feeling of like what it's like to be a manager of managers. And it feels often like I'm just sitting in meetings and like making 2 decisions a day, and that was work. But it is important, and that's how it goes. And you have to start to get used to that and like, and all that. So anyway, not to say, again, also I'll say too about the TikTok people, like just because people say they're successful or whatever on the internet, like, don't fucking believe them, like fact check that. Like that is, anybody can say anything they want on the internet.
No, there's a TikTok of one guy who's just scrolling on a chair, and he's like, I get paid $800,000 for just checking 2 emails and 1 meeting a day. I was like, No,
And
that
maybe
doesn't
he
work this
does.
way.
I mean, there's funny, like as you move up into like the investment level people, like investors, honestly, when you think about it, they don't have to do a lot of work. They take some meetings, they make investment choices, and then if they're making good investment choices, they should be sitting back and collecting returns on it. The classic example is Warren Buffett. Like he doesn't go in and tell companies how to run. He probably goes to some board meetings, but probably not many anymore. He just makes a few decisions a day or maybe less, like a few a week, and he's making more money than all of us. So there is some truth to that. Like as you get further up the money chain, you can do less work.
But eventually, let's go back with the Warren Buffett example. There is a chance that Warren Buffett has a group of people who do the research, who do
Oh,
everything for
absolutely.
him.
Yeah.
So he doesn't have to worry. He just gets the final result on a plane, on a gold plate, and they tell him,
Right.
this is the company that we're going to deal with. These are the numbers. This is the number that
Exactly.
you need to invest. Just sign here if you agree or if you disagree. And that's it. Like,
Oh,
he
I'm
doesn't
sure
even,
it could be. It could be, yeah.
like,
But
it,
he's like basically leveraged his reputation and his money in a huge way. And that's like, to me, as you move up the leadership chain or into bigger and bigger companies, like your ability as a leader is to just, you have a huge amount of leverage for every little decision you make, every little, because at some point he did do a lot of work. And probably, I don't want to say the guy doesn't work hard. I don't know. I'm not close to him. But he obviously did a lot of work early on in his career. If you read his book, it's really interesting about him, hustling to go. He actually went and visited a bunch of companies to figure out which ones were good investments. He wanted to see the actual locations and meet with the managers on the front lines. So he's earned his stripes. And but anyway, he's also gotten smart in that he doesn't go do that anymore. Now he hires a whole team to go do that for him.
yeah, like for example, the Mark Zuckerberg example, he just wears the same type of clothes, so he doesn't have a decision fatigue
Right.
to
So he
what he
doesn't have to
wears.
think about it.
Yeah, but I realized, like, bro, now you're rich. You can wear just whatever you want. Like, you don't have to do that anymore.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, I'm gonna move to a different question, which is, you made a transition in your career where you left the startup CTO title to become a writer, which resolved towards creating Draft. From what I can say, it's like you write and generate content. The question will be composed into two parts, actually. What made you resolve towards writing a lot of content in the first place? And for someone who's starting out as a technical writer, what would you recommend to begin and process with?
Yeah. Well, I liked writing to begin with, and I'd always done it on the side for fun. So I figured if there was a way to get paid for it, I'd give that a shot. And I was at a point where the pandemic was happening; everything felt so uncertain anyway in the world that I figured now's as good a time as any to make a big transition in my career. And so it was interesting. It was fun. I kind of already said this earlier, but like I've always been the kind of person that I like change and I like to shift what I'm doing in my career. And I hope that I'm always making career shifts every 3 to 5 years. I just always want to be doing something different. And so writing was just a different outlet for creativity. What I also, it's similar feeling to code where, you spend all afternoon writing a big bunch of code. And at the end of the day, you can hit run and you see that thing on your screen. That's really cool. It's a just awesome creative feeling. Same as with writing. It's like you spend all day researching and building this article and you put all this stuff together and you put all this work into it. And then you kind of hit publish and there it is out in the world and people could, theoretically thousands of people can read it. So I love that feeling. And I think that was something that drew me to it. And then it kind of went along, it just realized there was more to it and started, that's when I started hiring people and using my management skills there. But as far as new writers getting started, I mean, if you're an engineer today, there are there's a list I help maintain of community writer programs, like companies that will pay you to write articles for them. You can go pitch them ideas, or they have maybe sometimes a backlog of ideas you can take. You could start there if you wanted. You could also just start writing whatever interests you. And I think that's probably the best bet, is to just see what it's like to get in the habit of writing every few days. I had another friend that went on like a daily writing challenge where he's trying to write 500 words or something every day, which is really, I mean, it doesn't sound like much, but it's hard to have the discipline to do that every day. So I think that's something you could also try. But yeah, just get out there and start doing it is the big advice I would have.
And as a big advice, as someone who's been in the, no, Um, yeah, electricity cutouts. It's very normal
Oh
here.
no.
I'll cut this part. Don't worry.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, and I have to hop off in just a couple minutes too. I sorry, I'm at about a time here.
Yeah. As someone who has been in the tech field for a decade, what would you recommend someone who is starting out to focus on, and consider it as if you're talking to a younger version of yourself?
I hate giving advice like this because I think a lot of it. If someone had told me at 22 or whatever when I started my career, like, oh, you should just go ahead and start a technical writing company, I would have told them, no way, I don't want to do that. Like, I would have just said, it doesn't matter what advice you have. And now here I am, 10 years, 12 years later, like doing it. So the point is, I don't know that I have like any specific advice. I'll say what's worked for me has been a few things. Networking has always worked for me. And what I mean by that is just keeping in touch with people who you like and you think are interesting and are in your field or somewhat related to your field. I have a list of like 50 or so people, and it rotates who's in that list, but like that I just try to keep in touch with every 3 to 6 months. Just like go have coffee with, have a phone call with, see how they're doing. That list I've had since college, and it has consistently brought me, I mean, everything: jobs, leads, employees, just so many benefits. So do keep up with people. That's always been helpful to me. Another thing has been I have gotten a lot of benefit from having a diverse skill set, not a very narrow skill set. And I know that a lot of times you'll hear in engineering the advice is go really deep into one topic, become an expert on it. I mean, fine if you want to do that. If you like that, then go for it. I don't like that, and I never wanted to do that, so I didn't do it. And being a generalist limited what I could do. Like in some ways, like I'm never going to go work at a really big company, partly because I don't like working at big companies, but partly because they want expertise. You know, they want somebody who's the person to go to for, I don't know, real-time data transfer in JavaScript or something, you know, like I'm not going to be that person. But I was really good for these early stage startups that needed a software engineering, full stack generalist who could do everything from set up the servers to get the front end code out there to write CSS. And like not many engineers can kind of do that level of generality. So do what you want to do, like in a way that like do what you're most passionate about and driven to do, because at the end of the day there are roles for both of those types of people, and there's nothing wrong with one or the other. It's just different. So you know, make your own path. And then the other thing that's really helped me has been building and having a support network. And this kind of goes into networking, but it's a little more deep than that. I've always had a group, like peer groups or mentor groups, that I could be part of, where I had people who were on my level or more experienced than me or around my experience level who I could talk to about the day-to-day issues I was having. I'm currently in one called Entrepreneurs Organization, which I mentioned, for like, you know, business owners. That's an amazing like support group for just like people who are going through this, starting a businesses. We meet every month. I've been in a CTO forum group in Chicago before when I was a CTO, where we got together every month and just talked about our issues over breakfast. Those support groups have just been super invaluable because they show me there's other people facing the challenges I have. I get to know them and like understand what they're going through and apply their learnings to my situations. So find that for yourself, whatever that looks like. You know, if you're a junior engineer, find a group of junior engineers you can kind of grow up with and learn together. Something like that. It's just so helpful.
I always end the podcast with a mental health question. It's something that I usually do, which is, have you ever faced burnout or imposter syndrome? And if you did, then what did you do to resolve those?
So I haven't had extreme burnout like I know a lot of people face. I've known people with like very, you know, demotivating, really hard to manage burnout. But I've absolutely faced imposter syndrome, and a lot of like fear is the big thing that gets me. I think I remember a period when I first started Draft.dev, and it started to go from me freelancing to me running a business and hiring employees, where I felt like I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, I remember I got featured in TechCrunch in 2021 as like the guy who knows developer marketing, and we just all of a sudden had this tons of startups coming to us for like wanting to work with us. And I was like, I am not anybody. Like I started this a year ago. I know nothing. Like, what are you doing? You know, like these people are coming to me acting like I'm some expert. And I think I don't know that I have like any insight on how I've faced that. I think it's partly just getting to know more people who also feel that way, and they look so much more successful than me and they still feel that. I've realized that this is a normal thing. And in a way, it's actually good, because what it means is I'm that uncomfort that I have with my new role or the way people see me means that I am growing, and I'm going to grow into that thing eventually, and I will feel comfortable with that title eventually, even if I don't today. So I've actually, one other thing I've done on the mental health side has been working with a coach, like a kind of an executive slash life coach, on these kind of struggles, the fear that you have as a business owner that the whole thing could fall apart, the imposter syndrome of like, what the heck am I doing? I do not know enough to run a 13-person company. I'm not qualified for this. All that feeling, like I have that all the time. And working with somebody who can kind of help me think through that and process that has been really helpful. So I encourage you, I mean, if it's for you, if it's therapy, if it's a coach, if it's a partner you work with, have some way to deal with that, because it's not going to go away.
But the thing is that let's say, for example, a life coach. What qualifies the life coach that he has a decent amount of knowledge to come up and tell you what to do? Like, you can come
Yeah.
up with you can come up with a life coach. He tells you like motivational stuff, but that's not going to help you compared to someone who's a life coach who's dealt with businesses, as an
Yeah,
example.
well, coaches and I think therapists too. They rarely, the good ones don't tell you what to do. I think they know that isn't what works, especially for like a free thinking entrepreneur. Like, what they do is ideally they help you come to your own conclusions, because the answer is in me. The answer to that imposter syndrome, to that fear, is inside of me. Like, at the end of the day, there's some way I can get my brain to realize, to process this. And a good coach will help you unlock that, regardless of their knowledge. So my coach personally, he does own his own coaching business, but he's not doesn't run a larger company than me. So he's never done that. He works with other entrepreneurs, but he's not going to tell me how to run my company. But he tells me when I feel stuck. He gets me to ask the questions that help me get unstuck, or like to set the target and hold me accountable for the thing that I need to get unstuck. So it's different. Everybody gets different things from this, but that's for me been the experience.
Thank you so much for listening to the episode. If you liked it, then feel free to watch our previous episodes and feel free to follow us on social media and rate us on your favorite podcast app of choice.